It was the building of the railway in 1885 that resulted in the first big influx of European settlers, most of them British. Evidence of the British sensibility is everywhere. Tudor motifs, colonial bungalows, empire. And the environment was not what you'd call hospitable. Dense, dark forests and a swampy foreshore. By the time 1905 rolled around, the community was big enough that Salmon Arm incorporated. The centennial of that event is a good time to look back with the help of 3 members of the Salmon Arm Museum and Heritage Association, Deborah Chapman, Dennis Marshall, and David Harper, on this edition of Pioneers and Places. Welcome to Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with you, along with my storyteller for the first part of the Salmon Arm story, Dennis Marshall, who's written one of the great books, I think, about the industry, the origins of the industry of the Salmon Arm area. It's called Sawdust Caesars, and the characters that created the lumber industry in the Shuswap. And the reason for the interest in lumbering in that area in the 1880s?
CPR.
This was the national dream heading right through this area.
That's right. And the CPR needed wood. Yeah? And lots of it.
What were they using the wood for? I got trestles in mind.
Okay, ties, piling for abutments and retaining walls, plus bridge timbers, and plenty of wood for snow sheds.
Yeah. No need to bring it from out of town if it was growing there. But you say that I guess the lumber supply, the timber supply, was spotty. Some of it was very good, but some of it wasn't. What was the deal with that?
We're talking about the Shuswap Lake area. From what I can gather, it was subject to fires, as was most of the timber in those days. We didn't have the suppression techniques that we do now. And all the early records indicate to me that the timber was spotty. Yeah. You had prime pockets plus not so prime pockets.
Yeah, I got this photograph here with 2 guys taken on a huge cedar tree. I mean, this was up the Salmon River Valley.
That's right.
And look at the coal deck piles of wood. Obviously, you don't take a picture of bad wood, but this looks like great wood for the lumbering industry.
I think it was typical for that area. There was some pretty prime stands in the Salmon River Valley.
Yeah. How many mills established to feed the CPR?
In the Salmon Arm area?
Yeah.
Originally 1. And that was founded by the Janelle brothers, who came from Thessalon, Ontario. They came west hacking ties and working as navvies for the CPR, spurned on by their mother.
What's Janelle's first name?
The primary character in the book is Joseph.
What kind of a character is Joseph Janelle?
Initially, I would describe him as an entrepreneurial buccaneer.
A freebooter.
Plenty of native intelligence, prone to cross boundaries whenever he saw fit, but I think a genius in his own right.
Because he didn't read or write, but he still ran an industry.
That's right.
How big an industry?
Well, it became quite large. In the end, he and his brother Peter, who was also a primary character in the Janelle family, they established a mill at Nakusp and spread all through the Kootenays, formed alliances with other lumbermen, to form Yale Columbia Lumber Company, which was a huge entity in around 1905.
Yeah. But 1884 or so, they set up a mill at Colt. Now, where is Colt?
In actual fact, their first mill in the area was set up slightly west of Colt, west of today's overpass, highway overpass at Tappan.
Oh, yeah.
And they had to access it via a ravine, in which they put a spur to connect with the CPR. And they ran that mill for about 4 years, I believe. Yeah. And ran out of available timber, bearing in mind it was impractical to skid timber any farther than, say, a kilometer. Yeah. He recognized that the best way to source timber was via the lake, so he then moved his operation farther east to what was called Colt, and we now know as Tappan Bay.
Now that looks like quite the installation. Look at, there's the mill. You've got acres of decked finished lumber. You've got a stern wheeler right offshore there, and this is the empire of this guy Janelle.
I think for the time it was quite significant, yes.
East of Salmon Arm, there's another operation. Who's out there?
Well, we have to go all the way to the Eagle Valley for that. Hood Lumber Company at Taft,
Yeah.
and the Mundy Lumber Company at Three Valley. But then we also had the Adams River Lumber Company at Chase, and it was built in 1906 by Spokane interests, and it was a huge model mill.
And when, I guess, the CPR finished building all its trestles and snow sheds and everything, what happened to these mills?
Well, there was a secondary market because the CPR, in its haste to get the line completed, built a lot of temporary trestles. Stony Creek, for example, had a huge timber trestle, used literally hundreds of thousands of feet of timber, but it was not satisfactory for the prolonged operation of the railway. So these were subsequently replaced.
So you always needed a lumber mill around to produce replacement material.
Plus snow sheds. The original line, as you probably know, was pushed through the Rogers Pass without regard to avalanches and so on. The reality soon crept in, and they found they had to, I think, build upwards of 6 or 7 miles of snow sheds, which took enormous amounts of timber.
Yeah, great stuff. Sawdust Caesars, and I hope I can get you back to tell more stories about the characters in Sawdust Caesars, but that gets us into the area of the shoe swap, because we're talking, of course, about the centennial of Salmon Arm, and we're going to take a break here. Be back in just a second to talk about another powerful woman. We'll do that in just a minute and a half. Welcome back to Pioneers and Places as we talk about the centennial of Salmon Arm. My guest in this segment is Deborah Chapman, and she's the curator of the Salmon Arm Museum and Heritage Society. And when you go to Salmon Arm, Haney House is on the southern and eastern outskirts of Salmon Arm. That's where the museum is.
40 acres of pasture and beautiful buildings.
It's great because you've located kind of a community of buildings there, haven't you?
Some relocated, some reconstructed, and some new.
As we go back 100 years to sort of assess who comes first of the Salmon Arm area, what character do you want to start with? Who was the first guy to set up business on the lakeshore?
The first entrepreneur was Dutch Charlie. He was an American buccaneer, and he thought Salmon Arm, or the bay, would be a proper place, a great place to make money. He built a brewery and a gambling house, a 2-story log structure, near where the paddle wheelers came in to supply the CPR with supplies.
This is the photograph of it. This is a substantial building.
It is, and it's also the site of Salmon Arm's first recorded murder. There was an altercation one night. I don't know if the lights went out.
They always did.
There was a body found, and a constable called from Kamloops. It took him 2 days to get to the community, and when he arrived, the witnesses had disappeared, and he was faced with a sullen Dutch Charlie, the bartender, and no witnesses to the situation. So he arranged for the burial of the body and padlocked the establishment, and Dutch Charlie left for parts unknown and has never been seen since.
He's not what you'd consider to be one of the pillars of the community. When do they start arriving? And I guess I'm looking at this map here, which is produced by the Department of the Interior in Ottawa, and it shows the bay, the Salmon Arm Bay of Shuswap Lake, the railway all around the edges, and all of these squares. What are these squares about?
They're homesteads marked in quarter sections, and they were taken up by people who hoped to farm the land. They cleared it. They had to build a building to live in, and all within 3 years of occupying the property. And the cost was $10.
There is a family we want to focus on specifically here. Who came out, first of all, to homestead in the Salmon Arm area?
Charles McGuire was in Kamloops. He was working for J.A. Mara as a clerk, and he saw with the completion of the railway that his job was going to be ending soon. So he took his savings and he purchased a piece of property in Salmon Arm, what would become Salmon Arm.
He's fascinating in his own regard, but it's the person, his mother, that's the more fascinating. Tell me about her.
That's true. Montreal-born Sarah Agnes Hudson McGuire had 9 children. She married a railway worker. He was an engineer, Alexander, and they were living in Winnipeg at the time when Charles came out to Salmon Arm.
What occurred to have Mrs. McGuire come out?
Well, unfortunately, Charles got sick, and Emily, his sister, came to nurse him, and he had consumption, which he died of 2 years later in 1892. Mrs. McGuire was the heir to Charles's estate, and that was a very astute move on Charles's part. He knew his mother was very capable. So in March, 2 months after he died, his mother arrived in Salmon Arm with 6 of her children from Winnipeg. Her husband had arrived later.
Yeah. Now, at this time, who is a woman in Canada? What legal authority does she or does she not have?
Mrs. McGuire was Mrs. McGuire. She was related to Mr. McGuire. She had not the right to vote. She could not own property unless she was the head of a household or she inherited it.
Because she inherited this property from her son, suddenly that gave her some power.
It did. She was a very energetic woman, and with the help of her children, she diversified the operation. She sold milk and fowl to the CPR. She raised ducks in a lake behind her property and sold them in her boarding house. They tasted swampy, so she didn't keep them on the menu too long. She was an incredible woman.
Yeah. So incredible that although she owned the property, she still couldn't make presentation to a variety of people. So she did that through her son.
She did through Jack. Jack had grown to a very capable young man, and about 1904, people started asking Mrs. McGuire for parts of her property, wanting her to subdivide. So she took that idea to the new council, which was formed in 1905, and she actually wrote a letter. There was no response, and so Jack presented her offer later in the year.
Do you know anything? Was she a tough nut? Was she a gentle character? Was she, obviously had a soft spot in her heart for railway employees, but where did she get this vision ability?
This drive, I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that one, Mike.
It's a neat story, isn't it? And it seems that we never find out enough about the strong female influences in our history. This woman is being commemorated.
She is, especially during our centennial.
Good work. Thank you very much, Deborah Chapman, for coming in and telling us about McGuire. We're going to take a break here, but we'll be back in a second to find about some of the other people that came in as a result of the establishment of Salmon Arm. Welcome back to Pioneers in Places. Dave Harper has taken over the chair for this section of the program. And really, what we're doing is a thumbnail sketch because there's so many good stories to tell that in a half-hour show you got to be pretty cheeky about what you use. It seems to me from the time that McGuire arrived and got the place sort of laid out in 1904, it grew like mad. Who came to the area? Who gravitated to this area, David?
Well, around the 1905 era, that's when the real promotion was happening over in England to bring settlers over to Western Canada. Certainly the CPR was doing its own promotion, but there was a lot of the communities' board of trades that were preparing brochures and pamphlets and things like that. They were trying to attract a sort of a middle-class crowd, and they knew, for instance, that there was a depression happening in England after the Boer War, and the class that was being affected most by the depression was the middle class. These people also, too, were thinking about going to the colonies, and certainly they didn't want to scare people off by saying, well, you could be a farmer if you were an accountant before that. So they were promoting the whole orchard industry, and certainly Salmon Arm had orchards from about 1893. But it was about that time, from 1905 to 1912, that things just really boomed. First trees are starting to really come into production, and everybody was noting that the quality of fruit that was being grown in the Salmon Arm Bay soil was superb.
And in this photograph, it makes a big deal of no irrigation necessary.
Exactly.
As opposed to the Okanagan.
It is interesting that many old-timers swear that a non-irrigated apple tastes so much better than an irrigated apple. I'm not quite sure if you can make that same test today, but the Salmon Arm apples were actually world famous, not just British Columbia or Okanagan apples, but Salmon Arm apples. They were preferred in London, in Edinburgh, in Liverpool, etc. And they regularly went over there. As soon as they were picked off the tree, they were placed on a train and shipped to Montreal and went over and won prizes for the apples.
And everywhere you looked, you could see, well, the Orchard House restaurant, for example, is that Indian bungalow style. They put a fingerprint of architecture everywhere.
Well, that's true. I mean, and some of the middle class English that came over were retired British Army and specifically British Army from India. And consequently, when they came to the shoe swap and looked around and said, okay, what kind of house are we going to build? They remembered their comfortable houses that they had in the foothills of the Himalayas up in Darjeeling and things. And those houses were a story and a half with a porch 2/3 of the way or 3/4 of the way around the house. Well, they were wonderful in the Himalayas in terms of the nice and cool breezes and all that sort of thing after the heat of the Indian plain. But in the shoe swap, they were totally inappropriate. And consequently, they were dark because no sunlight came in because of the porch. They were breezy and drafty because of that breezeway of the porch. But they were dotted all over the countryside.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, all of the cultural things that the British brought. This picture of a musical theater production. It looks like half the town's involved in this.
Oh gosh, yes, there was a there was a symphony, there was a choir. This particular production of The Girl of the Bandolier was written by the fellow to the left there. His name was...
Big mustache?
Yeah, big mustache. His name was Jack Leonard. And he went on to become quite famous down at the coast and being involved in music education, etc. But we would love to get an original score of The Girl of the Bandolier and put it on again in Salmon Arm.
What a good idea. Was there a big hotel in town? I mean, right there on the railway, you'd think that, I mean, you know what the CPR likes to put big hotels along the railway.
Well, certainly they put one in at Sycamoose, but locally there was several hotels. But the main one was the Hotel Montebello, which was right downtown on Hudson Street. And it was a beautiful old structure. And actually existed right up to 1967.
And look at this picture on the Montebello. What in the world is happening that would bring this many people out?
Well, it's a wonderful community activity. They would have a cleanup day every year. It would be in the spring, probably late May or early May or whatever. And because the town was of a sufficient size, or a small enough size, I should say, everybody would come out with their scythes and hoes and shovels and rakes. And they would go around and clean up the empty lots, clean out the ditches. And at the end of the day, they'd have a big dance and a potluck supper. And what a wonderful way to keep a community together.
And look at that, and there's even a guy there with a whip.
Oh, I'm sure there were some of them that would flake off somewhere, but still.
What a great photograph, and the detail is just wonderful.
Stunning, isn't it?
Who do we owe the wonderful photographic legacy to?
Well, we had the main photographer at the time in Salmon Arm, his name was Rex Lingford. And he came over from England as a young man. He'd been trained in actually landscape painting, but he applied it as well. He didn't think he would make a living as a painter over here, so he decided to take up the camera and become a town photographer. He started photographing in 1907, and then when the First World War came over, he was one of the first ones to enlist. As a matter of fact, that photograph probably was one of the last photographs he took in town, because I think within a month he had enlisted and gone back to England. He survived the war, came back, became the town clerk for many, many years. So those photographs that we have of his exist in a very narrow time frame of 1907 to 1914. And what a wonderful picture of the town.
Oh, it is just a treasure. Some people came over, of course, to work and to be gentlemen and farmers and orchardists and sort of strive. But there was a lot of people who came over to, well, a few that came over to speculate and maybe make a little money on the proper placement of their property.
Well, certainly in terms of building a railroad, there's always that level of speculation as to where the railroad's going to go and what town sites there are. CPR was certainly no different, although the CPR really liked to keep their cards close to the vest. But there was some land speculation happening in the shoe swap. One in particular was a fellow named T.H. Hatherley and his son James. And they preempted land over in Sunnybrae in just 1884 or something like that, just before the railroad was going through, and they were still building around that area. And they speculated that that the CPR was going to build a bridge between Engineers Point and Sunnybrae. And rather than going all the way around the bay.
Oh, yeah.
And they would have their town site all ready and would make them in. Well, CPR hated people speculating, although I'm sure there were other reasons why they decided to go around the bay. For quick reasons, as a matter of fact, because they had to get the railroad done in a certain number of months.
Yeah.
They came through Salmon Arm in the spring of 1885, and of course the last spike was driven in November of 1885. So that sort of left the Hatherleys high and dry over at Sunnybrae, and they very quickly gave up their preemption and moved to the coast, where James, the son, went on to some renown. I'm not quite sure what his actual job was, but he went to some renown as a figure skater.
And this is a picture of him wearing some sort of Spanish flamenco dancer's costume, wearing figure skates.
Exactly.
And the only picture we have to commemorate the Hadleys, but by gosh, it's a stunning one.
That is for sure.
It is. Look at the size of the town. How big did it get quickly?
Well, very quickly, and there was a boom period between 1905 and 1912, as I said, and around the turn of the century, it was maybe several hundred souls. And all of a sudden, within a few years, we had it up to about 1,500 people.
What's the population in 2005 as we celebrate a centennial?
Well, it fluctuates, but I believe it's around 16,000.
Yeah. And still very pretty. The lake, of course, figured in it. The stern wheelers, of course. It was a bit impeded by a kind of a big muddy bay, wasn't it?
Well, that's true, and certainly the Chamber of Commerce rhetoric has always had a problem with our mud flats. They would rather much have it as a beach. But over the years, the bay was actually, Salmon Arm was built with its back to the lake. The only thing that really affected the growth of Salmon Arm would be the daily visits of the paddle wheelers, and certainly one of the main ones that was plying the lake at that time was the Andover. It was one of the classier boats and hauled passengers around the lake. There were several others, the Florence Carlin, the Ethel Ross. They were owned by the Columbia River Logging Company that Dennis alluded to, and but their main task was to supply the logging camps around the lake and boom logs, etc. So they were a little bit more tug-like as opposed to the Andover.
Dave Harper, I thank you for coming in, and we're going to get you back to talk about the photographers, to talk about other things. Part of a book which we really want to tell you about. Dennis didn't tell us that this was his book, but Dennis Marshall produced a book called Fleeting Images of Old Salmon Arm, and it includes some of the remarkable photographs which you've taken and digitally enhanced,
yes,
and they are spectacular. Good work on that.
Thank you, Mike.
Happy centennial.
I appreciate that.
Dave Harper, thank you for rounding up the trio of folks from Salmon Arm in to talk about the origins of that fine town and to kick us on to other stories that we're going to be telling about the Shuswap area. Thanks for being here, too, for Pioneers and Places. We'll see you again next time.